Next round.
I'll switch it off.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, let me testing.
Switch this off now. Let me switch this off. Otherwise.
bit of an emergency about 20 minutes ago. Where do I clip this here?
Yeah, it's click there.
Saqib, do you have a clip? Do you have a clicker for this?
Check where'd it be? It's over there, I think. Is it on the left of the... On the white bin in the corner.
Oh, okay. Jazakallah khair.
Is that it?
No, this is the remote.
Sure. Oh, it's there on the left of the laptop.
I think this is the receiver.
Why would the clicker disappear?
And then would you like some water?
Saqib, how do you switch on this TV?
No clicker?
Nope.
Okay, you just have to go old school.
Just have to go old school.
Where's your mic? Is it...
Can you hear me? Should I put it higher?
It's fine, it's just there's a bit of rubby. Make sure it's tight at the...
What now? Why isn't this switching on then?
Because it's like an extended screen, so you need to drag it over.
Oh. Really? It's not working that way.
No?
Hang on. No, it's not working like that. Um, there we go. Not very good with technology. Present. Yeah. Okay. When can we start? Okay. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum everyone. So we're going to be doing philosophy of science, a sort of crash course. Very basic stuff, actually. Can look a bit complicated for someone who hasn't looked at this before, but that's why we've given it a lot of time. So a lot of time for Q&A and a lot of time for discussion and whatnot. So it's going to take me approximately 45 minutes to an hour to cover the content. And after the content, I'm expecting you guys to actually ask a lot of questions. That's why we've given this particular seminar about 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours. Okay, so firstly, it's always good to start off with a sort of reminder about why we're doing what we're actually doing. So we as Muslims, it's our duty to obviously convey the message of Islam, right? So Islam is something which every Muslim should seek to advance. They should seek to advance it through their behavior, regardless of how much limited knowledge they have. We as Muslims believe that Islam is the only route of happiness. It's the only thing that will make a human being whole, right? Make a human being complete. You know, Allah says in the Quran, indeed, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find peace. So we believe as Muslims that, you know, it's our duty to convey Islam. And if we were alive, say 1,000 years ago, then if there was some sort of course, it would be about Christianity. Or if we were in the Indian subcontinent, it would be about Hinduism, about how to give dawah to Hindus. Or maybe Buddhists. So why are we doing something on science today? The reason is because science has actually become in a sort, has become into a sort of religion. So science is obviously a beautiful way of trying to find out how the world works. It's an attempt to work out how the world works. Scientism is something very distinct. It's something which is using the garb of science, using the lab coat of science, using the language of science, using the figures of science, but it is something wholly different. A good way of sort of thinking about this is when we're speaking to people about the belief in God, they sometimes give us very bizarre answers. So I remember a few years ago, I used to work in High Wycombe, and after work, I used to go to the internet cafe. There's obviously many years ago when we didn't have internet on our phones and whatnot. And I went to the internet cafe, and there's a gaming cafe. You got video games there, you got internet there. You know, people used to hang around there and stuff. So there's a guy, I used to regularly see this guy there. He was the owner of the shop, and sort of, you know, got to know him a little bit. So one day, when there was a bit of an opportunity to speak about Islam, I saw an opening. I said to him, like, do you believe in God? And he looked at me with like straight eyes and he said, I believe in science. And I felt really weird because it kind of reminded me of when you're trying to speak to a biblical, Bible-thumping, evangelical Christian who, you know, you're trying to tell him about Islam or the Prophet ﷺ, and he says, I believe in the Holy Spirit, or I believe in experience, or, you know, I could feel a religious fervor coming out of his language. Now, that got me thinking, because it took me back a bit. And it took me a bit of time to try and work out what would have been a good response, which I didn't use at the time. But it's kind of like this, right? So I could have said to him, look, your question, when I asked you, do you believe in God? And you said, I believe in science. Your question is completely misdirected. Your question has nothing to do with, so your answer has nothing to do with the question I asked. It's kind of like saying, you know, what's your name? And you reply, I don't like stamp collecting, right? So the question has nothing to do with the answer, yeah? The question is something else, the answer is something else. So when I asked him about his belief in God, he said, I believe in science, and he thought that was a rational answer. And the reason is because subconsciously, he has subscribed to scientism, the excessive belief in the scientific method. This sort of idea that science is the only route of knowledge, or it is the main route of knowledge, and that if something is not scientific, it's not rational, and that science leads to truth. Science gives us certainty, science gives us proofs. So a very crude misunderstanding of science is scientism, yet it is very popular in the world. So today, when we're actually covering this topic, I want you guys to realize what the objective is, yeah? The objective is not just to learn the philosophy of science. I mean, to be honest, you could just go learn that at university or online, in a YouTube clip. There's loads of universities which put their content online. But the purpose is to teach the philosophy of science to undermine scientism in the context of dawah. Okay? So a very particular thing we're trying to do today. We're trying to undermine scientism, because scientism has become into a sort of religion, and we're trying to undermine it using the philosophy of science in the context of dawah. Okay. Raise your hands if you understand what the objective is. Anyone unclear? Okay, good. So we have a sort of agreement there. Okay. Why are you not working? There we go.
Can I be elaborate probably?
Sorry?
A bit more elaboration probably, so that we understood that you're going to use some philosophy.
Yes.
Some philosophy who scientists use it, and
yes.
How can we use them undermine the whole agenda of scientism?
Yep, excellent.
Is
So
what you're trying to
yes,
say?
yes. So we are trying to convey the message of Islam, and the wall that we face today is scientism. So that's why we're tackling it. Yeah, that's the objective. Okay, so I thought it was important to bring in this topic of social conformity, right? Because just like the gentleman who I was speaking about before, who said, I believe in science, chances are he probably never studied science at undergraduate level, right? Chances are he probably doesn't understand anything about the philosophy of science, or generally about epistemology, how you know what you know, right? He is a product of the social pressure to conform to scientism. And we as human beings, we conform to our surroundings. That's just a human thing to do. But how deep is this type of social pressure? I think a good sort of way of understanding it is an interesting experiment which was done by Solomon Asch, I think 1960s or 70s. Try and look at the, you can see the style of the people there. It's probably 60s or 70s, right? So he did this experiment, this psychologist, forgotten which university, I think it was Stanford. Anyway, so what he did is that he had a group of people who were presented with these lines. So they were given, this is the line that they need to match the other lines with, right? So all of these people were supposed to give the answer, which is the closest to this line? Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it 3? What do you think the answer is?
Oh, in length, yeah, 3.
3, right? No dispute about that. This is actually the actual example that they gave, right? However, one of these guys was actually the test subject. All the rest of them were actually actors. Okay? So when they were presented these lines, they were being asked in this order, going down, to the actor. I mean, the actor is going down towards the test subject. So, which line is closest to this particular line? So the first guy actually gave the wrong answer. He gave, say, 1. The second guy, they asked him, instead of giving the right answer, he also said the same answer as the person before. Say it's 1. The third person said 1, fourth said 1, fifth said 1. All of them are giving the wrong answer. Now we have the test subject who doesn't know the rest of these are actors. What do you think he said? 1. What's the right answer? 3. He denied his own perception to fit with the peer group. Okay? And when we look at this, we think, oh my God, what an idiot, right? That's actually us. That's actually me and you. This isn't some guy who's got some mental issues or something. This is human beings. We will sometimes deny what we see with our eyes to fit in line with society, right? So today what I'm asking you guys to do is to basically challenge something which society has created a pressure for us to accept, which is that of scientism. As an example, I was looking through a poster for some event that Richard Dawkins was attending, right? And in the description of Dawkins, in that poster, there's I think he's giving a talk in October, September, whatever, I'm not sure where. It was describing him as a world-renowned scientist, right? So probably that's true from the perspective that he is the most famous professor in the world, right? Is he a scientist? We can get into that during the Q&A, but we can't take away that he is the most popular science figure in the world. I mean, that's undeniable. And if you look at his writing and his teachings and his lectures, his talks, his rhetoric, it is there to push out this idea of scientism. For example, if you're to pick up his book, The Magic of Reality, which interestingly, he wrote for a younger audience, right? Like pre-teens and teens and whatnot. That book was designed to actually get people to subscribe to, it was a primer to accept scientism. Now, what happens if somebody accepts scientism? Say somebody believes in God and they happen to accept scientism. What is the immediate effect of accepting that type of worldview?
He will try to prove his view based on scientism, those principles.
Okay, yes, good, that's possible. He will try and show scientism is true. What I'm really trying to get at is how will it impact the way he sees, say, God or religion? What happens? Exactly, Jazakallah khair. He will abandon his belief. Why? Because if scientism is teaching us that you can only accept things that you can see, you can only accept things that are tangible, that are empirical, then is God empirical? No. So if somebody reads a book like that, The Magic of Reality, they may think it's a harmless book and I'm just reading this book. However, if they accept the view of scientism, that the acid of scientism will corrode away any belief in God or the unseen. Now, as Muslims, our worldview is based upon the unseen, right? It's right in the beginning of the Quran that we believe in the unseen. Now, that doesn't mean we believe without evidence. It just means that we believe in the unseen. So accepting scientism corrodes away any type of belief in God automatically. It's like an automatic thing, right? So when it comes to scientism, we need to view it as a alternative system, as an alternative religion, as an alternative ideology, and we need to accept that when we are trying to explain to people that scientism is not correct, we are actually facing an uphill struggle because of social conformity. Because you may point out to somebody, hang on a second, scientism doesn't make any sense. However, if people are prone to deny their own perceptions to fit in line with society, then we shouldn't be too optimistic if we think we can gain this knowledge and unravel scientism. Now, that doesn't mean we give up, but what it basically means is that you guys just need to be aware of how powerful social conformity is. Okay, so what we're going to be covering is, does science lead to atheism? Does science lead to certainty? Because this is one of the cruxes of scientism. Does science disprove religious claims in the sense of Islam? We don't really care about other religions from that perspective, right? That we're only trying to defend the Islamic worldview. Science is the main root of knowledge. We're going to be challenging that idea, because that idea is prevalent in society. And does science disprove the Quran? Okay. A little bit hazy, but you guys can see the picture there. By the way, throughout the presentation, feel free to ask a question. I'm just going to repeat your question for the sake of the audio and whatnot, but don't feel shy to, I mean, you don't have to raise your hand, you can just blurt out if you have a question. Okay, so what is the scientific method? Now, what we need to be aware of is there's a difference between the public understanding of science and the academic understanding. So when we speak about a lot of the topics today, there's going to be a surprising sort of paradigm shift if you haven't understood some of these things in the past. That some of the things we take for granted, they are not that way in academia, right? There's a public understanding and there's an academic understanding, and they're different. So for example, from a public point of view, the scientific method is pretty well defined. However, from an academic point of view, there is a huge discussion about what is science, what is pseudoscience, how do you demarcate science from pseudoscience, and so on and so forth, and what constitutes the scientific method. Do we start off with hypothesis first, or is it just observations and whatnot? So it gets very fuzzy. However, for our purposes, that doesn't matter, right? It really doesn't matter. For our purposes, all we need to understand is science works by trying to apply reason to the natural world, by using observations to test hypotheses, and to basically try and falsify those and come up with models of the world. So we know there's reasoning, we know there's theorizing, we know there's observations, we know that there's peer review, and we understand that science works in this particular way. But it's very important to realize what is science and what is not science. Because one of the claims we're going to be challenging today is science leads to truth. And one of the answers, one of the responses you're going to hear is, of course, science leads to truth, because the shape of the earth is round, is it not? That's not going to change due to new information. We know that fossils exist. And we know that a fossil of a dinosaur that existed, say, whatever million years ago, that this fossil is of a living creature. That's not going to change. So therefore, it's true. We know water is H2O. Therefore, we know with certainty that science gives us truth. However, this is a very poor response. The reason why this is a poor response is because science is way more than observations. Science is a method to to try and understand the world, and observations are a key part of that. But a scientific observation, which we know is true, we know water is H2O, we know fossils exist, we know the earth is round, is not the same as a scientific theory. And a scientific theory is the highest level you can achieve in science. Not a scientific law, it's a scientific theory. So scientific observations, or observations that scientists use, you cannot give them the same epistemic weight as a scientific theory. And also, different scientific theories have different weights, right? So something that we can observe about, okay, so what is the cause of this particular disease, right? Comparing that scientific theory or hypothesis to, say, string theory or some theory in cosmology or the origin of life, we know that this is a lot more speculative than this, right? So you can't just put all science into one shelf and say, yeah, they all have the same level of certainty. Consider observations are used in astrology and astronomy. Okay. So, which one of these is science, by the way? Astronomy. Astrology is using observations. But why is it not science?
It's a superstition.
Yes, superstition, right? It's completely untestable. So, you know, we as Muslims, as you know, we don't believe in horoscopes, but we don't even believe you can read horoscopes. However, if you were to read a horoscope, what you would find is you're born on April the 11th, 1985. So therefore, next year, you may or may not be in a car accident. Next year, you may or may not be in a better or worse financial position. Next year, you may or may not lose a loved one, right? Hey, yeah, that's going to come to be true, right? But that's completely untestable, right? So it's using observations, but it's not science. So anybody that tries to equate science and observations as the same thing, we know what they're saying is wrong, because you need, it's not just simply a case of having observations. But if you were to use something in astronomy, a prediction using a mathematical formula, where is this planet going to be in 6 months from now, and you're to go out and you're to make a prediction, right, it's going to be there, and you're to go out and study it after 6 months, you're going to find it's either there or it's not there. So the theory is quite testable. So now we've covered that science as a methodology is way more than observations. Okay? Any questions on that before I move on? Okay. So, science is the only yardstick for truth, right? This is a very popular idea, right? My daughter, she used to watch this, but she still does, this program called Peter Rabbit, right? Any of you who are parents would know of this program. It's a very addictive kids program. What's funny is that I was watching a clip of Peter Rabbit, and the rabbits are amongst themselves discussing something, right? And one of them says, "Oh, there's no scientific proof for that." And I thought, my God, they get them young, don't they? I mean, of course, we go through this brainwashing of scientism when we go through primary, secondary, university, documentaries and whatnot. But I didn't think it was going to be in a children's program. But you do start getting this sort of thinking, into this sort of thinking at a very young age. And you have to learn to actually unravel these ideas. So this idea that science is the only yardstick for truth is not even, you don't even have to make an argument that this is understood in the world, right? It's a given. Everybody knows that this is what we're supposed to believe. However, the idea that science is the only route of knowledge or the primary route of knowledge is challenged when we look at the philosophy of science and epistemology in general. and we're going to be covering these points.
You're gonna send the slides to us, or
I'm not sure if you can do that.
okay.
Maybe if you send us an email afterwards.
Because otherwise we have to take notes though. Or something.
This talk is available on YouTube. In terms of slides, Saqib, do we share slides?
Ahmad does.
Oh, okay, he does. Okay, that's fine. We can share slides then. That's not an issue. We can send it to your emails afterwards, and if you don't get it, then that's the guy you need to chase up, right? Okay, so we're going to have all these different types of limitations on science, on knowledge that we cannot acquire using science. Okay. So, what do you feel when you see an image like this? What are the sort of feelings that you get?
Sad.
Sadness? What else? Neglected?
Heartbreaking.
Huh?
Heartbreaking. Heartbreaking.
Heartbreaking?
I wanna help.
You want to help? You get these moral feelings. Empathy, sympathy, altruism, right? You get this. Well, if you're a sort of person who says, look, I just believe in science, I'm a very logical person, then I have some very sad news for you, sadder than this photo. All of your feelings are nonsense. They don't really exist. We cannot test this image to see whether this child should be helped. There's no morality there. We can detect the colors. We can do a chemical composition of, say, the slippers. But where is morality here? Can you put morality through through the scientific method? Can you test morality on a scale? You cannot. Yet, is morality something that is real?
Yes.
Of course. Even people who say, yeah, morality is relative, right? On the minimum, these are people who say, I believe in truth. I believe in following truth. If that's the case, following truth is a good thing, right? And that's a moral claim. So this whole idea that, look, if we can't know something scientifically, it's not true. What that basically means is human behavior as a whole is generally governed by morals. That's a big claim, but I'm planning on explaining why that's the case. Human behavior is driven by morals. Okay. Go to a major charity in this country, right? Go see the volunteers who are holding buckets who are not being paid money. Or go see those people who are looking for cures to cancer and other things. Or somebody who is going to work because they want to feed their family. If you're to take a snapshot of London right now, everyone is involved in some sort of behavior, and the majority of that behavior is driven by some form of morality. Why am I going to work? Because I want to feed my family. Morals. Why am I looking for this scientific cure? Because I want to help people. Why am I collecting for someone else when I'm not being paid money? Why am I giving charity? Because I want to help. Yet, even though revolutions in human history and human behavior generally is driven by morality, science cannot detect it. So if someone says, I only believe in science, I believe in scientism, science is the main root of knowledge. In that case, you've done two things. The vast majority of human behavior you undermined, including your own behavior. And two, why do you believe in science? I believe in science because science leads to truth. We can ask them, okay, so science leads to truth, but why are you following truth? Why not follow falsehood? Because truth is a good thing. Aha, so even you doing science is based on morality. You cannot escape it. So, if somebody wants to maintain they only believe in science, they undermine human behavior and even their behavior for the love of science. You had a question?
No, the question that's what I think probably just adding a point. It's like an atheist loves another atheist, and then he loves to have a drink with him and the coffee. So is this like he goes easy with them? So it's again coming.
It's all morality.
Feelings.
Yeah.
Intangible.
Yeah, because there's a whole discussion from material atheists, right? Material scientists as well, that and some philosophers, that what is love? Is love just a frequency? Is it just a chemical reaction? Right? Is that what it is? And we know that these things are absurd. So if somebody wants to say, look, I only believe in science, here's a very easy way of bringing that argument to a halt by pointing out that science cannot detect morality. Okay. Another thing is that science only deals with what we can observe. It doesn't deal with what we cannot observe. So if I'm a scientist and I want to know what's on the third floor in room 305, I walk into the room and I see a bunch of chairs. Can I go from that, because they are chairs on the third floor in room 305, therefore room 702 also has chairs? No. You're only limited to what you can observe. And if you take the totality of the people working in science in the world today and who have historically worked, and you take all of the universe and what can potentially be known, then what you'll realize is we know very little, right? We don't know what we don't know. So science can only give you knowledge about what we can actually observe. So it's limited to observations. And this is interesting because if you find somebody saying, look, I only believe in science. I only believe in science. I only believe with what I can see. And this person, and you get this package, very predictable package of people, right? They are liberal, they believe in scientism, they believe religion's irrational. However, if you're to ask them, so do you believe in biological evolution? Yes. Do you believe in the Big Bang Theory? Yes. Do you believe in plate tectonics? Yes. However, this person who is saying, I only believe in science, you ask them, have you done the experiments or have you actually verified these things yourself? Chances are they'll say no, because it's impossible for somebody to go out and verify every single scientific experiment in the world. In fact, if you look at PhDs which are done by scientists, right? I mean students, and later on, scientific research, they would be on such a niche topic. Everything else, even within that field, they'll have to trust the work of other scientists. So when someone says, look, I only believe in science and what I can observe, you can tell them, well, that means you can only believe in the science that you've done yourself, because all the rest of the science you haven't actually done. We're driven by questions of meaning, purpose. We are driven by these important realities. So, why do I exist? What's the purpose of life? What happens after we die? What's the best way to live? Right? These existential questions are meaningful, yet science cannot give an answer to them. These are beyond the pay grade of science. Science cannot test the personal. Yes?
What they say in future science will develop that it will give you answers to these types of questions.
Okay. So if I was to ask you, is it possible to square a circle? What if we in the future discover something that we can square the circle? Very clear, it's a contradiction. Do you believe in married bachelors? It's a contradiction. What if I say to you, you know, you're just limiting science here, sir. We can discover somewhere in a cave in Latin America, maybe 1,000 years from now, a married bachelor. What would you say to that?
A married bachelor is a contradiction.
It's a contradiction. Excellent. So, when someone says science can answer these questions, they are essentially saying that. So science deals with how things work, an attempt to explain how things work. It is not an explanation of why things exist in the first place, or ontology or metaphysics, right? That's not what science is. That's philosophy. So when someone says, like for example, another popularizer, Stephen Hawking, he says in his book, A Brief History of Time, philosophy is dead. You know, they tried it, they haven't really achieved anything, and scientists need to carry on the search for these deep answers because philosophers have failed for the last couple of thousand years. What's the problem with that?
Science based on philosophy, like that.
No, but what's the problem with his statement?
He's trying to remove the thought process of thinking what's behind
Yes.
the rational thing.
Yes. But what's the problem with that though?
It is observed.
No. So for example, when he says philosophy is dead, right? Is that a scientific statement? It's not. It's actually a philosophical statement. It's like saying this sentence only has two words in it. It's a self-contradiction. So science cannot do those things. And that doesn't mean we hold it against science. It's simply saying it's a tool, but it doesn't do that job. So if somebody makes you a cake, you can look at the chemical composition of the cake, look at the types of fruit that are used, look at the acidity of the fruits, you can look at what temperature it was baked at. What you cannot do is scientifically test the personal.
How do you feel when you test it?
Not only that, that would be the problem of, say, hard consciousness, right? Or hard problem of consciousness. That's an additional problem. But another thing would be, who made the cake? Your auntie. Why? Because she loves you. That's a personal explanation. Science cannot give you that personal explanation. It can give you a mechanical explanation. Okay, mathematics. So you have very vocal people saying, we believe in science. If it's not scientifically proven, it's not true. Science is based upon mathematics. Science cannot prove mathematics. And this is a bit of a disappointment to those who say, look, don't undermine science. Science can resolve all problems. If someone does say that to you, you can say, okay, no problem. A squared plus B squared is equal to C squared. Right? Can you please show this scientifically? Can you show that scientifically? Pythagoras' theorem? Or 1 plus 1 is 2. Can you show that scientifically? The very definition of 2 is 1 plus 1. You cannot show that scientifically. So science is based upon mathematics. It cannot prove mathematics. So this whole idea of science is the main root of knowledge is, again, challenged by mathematics. Logic. Inductive logic or deductive logic. Fuzzy logic or any other sorts. Science cannot say anything about logic or why logic follows. So normally in a deductive argument you have premises and you have a conclusion. And the premises, if they're sound, they logically entail the conclusion. So say, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. This deductive logic, we cannot prove this using science. So science itself, it requires inductive logic. However, it cannot prove inductive logic. So if someone says, look, I believe in science, it's all about science, science makes perfect sense, then they have to deny logic, because logic cannot be explained using science. Okay. The popular idea, if you don't see it, you cannot believe it, which is a byproduct of the scientism view. Everything has to be empirically verified. We have enough reasons to know why that's false. However, a good way of capturing that is say yourself, right, Muhammad, right? So do you have a great going back 50 generations, a grandmother? Yes. Okay. What's her name? You don't know? Okay. Which village is she buried in, or city, or?
Somewhere in Somalia.
Okay, somewhere in Somalia, that's fine. Where in Somalia? Do you have her DNA?
No.
Do you have her clothes? Her perfume, her house? Know who her husband is? How do you know she existed?
I believe she existed. Because
Why?
Our Pai brought it to her.
Yes. So you're alive today, so she must have existed. Is that based on science? No. That is based upon logic. You exist. So logically, going back, you must have had a 50th generation grandmother. Simple logic. So if someone says, I don't believe in something unless I can see it, well, you've never seen your going back 50 generations grandmother, have you? But you believe it to be true because of logic. So science doesn't show this, logic does. So a claim that science, if it's not scientific, I do not believe it, that would mean we deny most of the things that we all take to be true based upon logic. Okay, how many people here believe in Kangaskhan? 1, 2, 3. Come on, man, you believe in it? Yeah, okay, you didn't raise your hand. He studies history, so if he doesn't believe in it, then I'll have to pick on him, right? So, a few people are doubtful. But look, Kangaskhan is a real historical figure. He did really exist. Okay. Can you prove he existed using science? No. What if somebody says, we can get his DNA?
Is this Kangaskhan DNA? How do we know?
Yes, good.
It's not here, so I think
Yes, we don't know where, we don't know, even if someone says this is his DNA.
We don't have reference DNA to prove it's his DNA.
Exactly, excellent. We don't know where his grave is, because according to myth, well, one thing is clear, we don't know where his grave is, that's clear. But according to a legend, a myth, he was buried secretly somewhere in Mongolia, and the people who went to go bury him, who were supposed to hold this secret till they died, they were killed. Yeah, they were actually killed. So we cannot verify his existence. So if someone says, I only believe in science, you have to deny the existence of Kangaskhan, Plato, Aristotle, your ancestors. General history is based upon testimony. It's not based upon science. So if somebody says, I only believe in science, they have to deny history, but they also have to deny geography, right? So for example, someone says, I believe in Mongolia. How can you show that Mongolia exists using the scientific method right now? Do you believe Mongolia exists? Have you been there? How do you know it's actually a real country?
through education, social media.
Yeah,
Just the water.
which is testimony. So majority of human beliefs are testimonial. Majority. More than 99% are testimonial. So if someone says, I only believe in science, you even have to deny your mother is your mother. Okay, so Muhammad, how do you know your mother is your mother?
She gave birth to me.
How do you know? How do you know it wasn't her sister?
It's hard to prove.
Hard to prove. Do you believe she's your mother?
Yes.
Okay, how can you prove it though?
Through tests we can do in our DNA. Maybe.
Okay, so you do a test and then you find out, okay, it matches, therefore you're her son. Have you done the test? Okay, so how do you know?
I rely on the testimony of the doctor.
Excellent. So it's testimonial. Testimonial. Okay.
How would you respond to someone saying the person doing the test would know that it's them that has done the test? So, for example, if someone wanted to prove that their mum was their mum,
Yep.
and they did the test themselves,
Yep.
would that also be testimonial? Would that be something?
That wouldn't be testimonial because they've done the test themselves. Oh, repeat the question. So the question is, if someone does the test themselves, is that testimonial or is that empirical? That's empirical. So they've verified that's my mum. However, at the point that you're asking them the question, they believe their mum's their mum before they did the test. Right? So we cannot escape testimony taking the lion's share of our beliefs.
So can I add one point to the sister's talk?
Yes, sure.
Even though the person conducting the test, as a scientist, we know the procedure he follows, it was written somewhere. So again, this is testimonial for him that I'm doing this
Yes.
this way. It will give the positive result.
Yes.
The response from the machine,
Yes.
which is testimonial. That
Yes.
if you see red, it means positive. If you see blue, is negative.
Yes.
Again, that's testimonial.
Yes, excellent. So I'm just going to repeat what the brother said. So you're going to follow a particular methodology, and that methodology would be maybe you spit into this little tube, you put it in a machine, it gives you DNA, you take it from your mum, you match it, and therefore it's... But that methodology and the reliability of the machine and all the rest of that is based upon somebody else's work, right? Testimony. Okay, one last slide before we go for a quick... How long do we take breaks, Saqib? 10 minutes, okay. We have a cafeteria upstairs so you guys can refresh. Is it closed? Right. Okay, but you guys can still have a break. So the last thing is even the statement, I believe in science, when you're giving it like a ruku or sajda, right? I believe in science. This is self-refuting. Because this very statement, you cannot actually test that using the scientific method. So even this idea of I believe in science, that very sentence cannot be put through the scientific method. That is a statement in which you're putting your faith in a belief, your belief in science is being undermined because you cannot test that, right? So what we're going to do now is we're going to go for a approximately 10-minute break, if everyone can be back by 7. We do have drinks here, right?
Yeah, there's water.
Yeah, we have water, drinks, and we started a bit late, but inshallah then we'll carry on till Maghrib, and then we'll do a Q&A in the middle of it as well. Jazakallah khair. Do you want me to switch off the audio? Or
Yeah.
how? Does it take it off?
Yeah, it's not.
What do you need, man? Sit, you know? Hold on to it.
Salam bro, how you doing? Good to see you, man. Alhamdulillah. Salam bro, how you doing, man? Yeah, sorry, when you're calling me, I was in the middle of... I had some issues. Really?
But there's no voice.
No, what happened was, when you were calling me, I was talking to someone, and I saw your call, so I said, go to voicemail. Yes.
So you didn't go-
And I never check my voice
My
now.
phone just sat into you.
Is it?
Yeah, so I thought something's wrong with your phone. So
Oh, okay. Assalamu alaikum. How are you? Okay. Oh, you got a clicker. Where did you get this from? Okay. Let's see if it works. Oh, you have to plug it in. Thank you, young man. Yep.
Can you elaborate on the claim? Science is based on mathematics, but it can't prove mathematics.
Yep.
Elaborate on that.
Sorry? Sorry, carry on. He was just- to lift it from the ground from being a hypothetical possibility to a scientific theory. Yeah? Okay. So, we covered one idea so far. So, congratulations everyone. We've actually covered one idea, which is that science doesn't take the lion's share of our beliefs. Science is not the main root of knowledge. I'm really covering two basic ideas in this presentation, so one we just did, which is that science doesn't take the lion's share of our beliefs. It's not the only root of knowledge. The rest of the presentation, the majority of it, is going to be that science doesn't lead to certainty. Okay? These two ideas, they challenge scientism. So we're at the halfway mark right now. So one of the reasons why science doesn't lead to truth is that you can always get a new piece of data which challenges your previous data, theory, hypothesis. You can always have a new piece of data that can do that. So, as a scientist, say you are trying to discover what is the color of swans. You study 1,000 swans and you realize that they are all white. Then you study another 500, you've done 1,500 now, they are also white. So you then make a general statement that all swans are white. But you're going from a limited set of data to a general statement. That's just the way that science works. However, you can always discover a black swan. You can always discover a piece of data which doesn't fit in line with your previous theory. So, your general statement, all swans are white, this could be true with a small t for say 1,000 years until somebody goes and they discover an ancient fossil of a purple swan or a black swan or whatever. Or they discover a real black swan like they did, I think, in the 18th century sometime near Australia. So because of the problem of induction, we know that science cannot give us certainty. Okay? Now, okay, let's press the. I saw this interesting clip on YouTube. This was a public event between Richard Dawkins and the philosopher Stephen Law. So he's a philosopher of science and a quite prestigious philosopher, and obviously they had this event together. And you can watch this actual video on YouTube. It's called In Conversation with Richard Dawkins. Somebody in the audience asked a question. They said that, in a nutshell, they asked it in a bit of a long-winded way. They said, how can the scientific method be justified? In other words, how do we know that science gives us truth? Yeah. Because of obviously the problem of induction. So Richard Dawkins, he basically says to the audience member that it works. When you base rockets on science, they fly. When you base computers on mathematics, they work, and this sort of thing. When you base medicine on science, it works. And it's quite embarrassing because, in just a couple of words, he supposedly has given a solution to the problem of induction. The problem of induction is very important to understand that this philosophical problem, in terms of the philosophy of science, this was first pointed out by David Hume. That's 300 something years ago, right? Since his time, no one has said that this has been solved. Everybody that's had a crack at it has said it's insolvable. Yet in this public lecture, you have a very prestigious, well-known figure in just a few words trying to say, yeah, don't worry about it, it works. The reason why I'm highlighting this is not to just do a sort of personal attack on him, which I don't mind. I can do that anyway. It's because he is seen as a leading figure. He should know better than that. This is philosophy of science 101. This isn't even advanced level. I mean, I'm talking about philosophy of science at a crude level. You would know the problem of induction is insolvable. Yet he claims in this video clip, oh yeah, it works. However, if he had a little bit of understanding of the philosophy of science, and not just science, then he would know it's insolvable. And to Stephen's embarrassment, Dawkins said this, and if you watch the clip, it's kind of funny because he's hosting him as being this prestigious scientist, so it'd be very embarrassing to correct Richard Dawkins in public, but he does, and you can hear it on the microphone, he does say, well, that's induction, you know, because if you say it works, you're basically saying the problem of induction can be solved using induction, which doesn't make any sense. In fact, David Hume, when he pointed out this problem, he said to the effect, right, you can always get a new piece of data which can show that your previous theory is wrong. So that's the problem of induction. And he points out, obviously, we can't say we can trust science because it works, because in the future we may find out it doesn't work, which has happened. So the problem of induction can't be solved using induction. Yeah? If someone tried to make an argument, I believe in the Bible, why? Because the Bible says so. You're just not going to take them seriously. Yeah? It's not a coherent argument. So you can hear him on the microphone sort of saying embarrassingly, oh, that's induction. And I wanted to highlight this to show you can be a prestigious, well-known academic like Richard Dawkins, who's the most popular science figure in the world today, and know a lot about your own field of evolutionary biology, but know hardly anything, and even get the basics wrong in the philosophy of science. Now, from a Muslim context, I want you to think of it this way. We have Hanafi fiqh, and we have the usul of fiqh. So we have the jurisprudence of Imam Abu Hanifa, and we have the usul, the foundations. Every single person who is trained in Hanafi fiqh, they would know the usul of fiqh. By the way, you guys understand usul? Foundations. This is jurisprudence, right? A person who comes along out of, say, a Darloom or a major Islamic institution, say even Medina University or Azhar, right? The oldest Islamic institution in the world. Say you meet somebody from Azhar University who claims to be a Hanafi scholar, and they don't know the usul, they don't know the foundations, but they just know the fiqh. You wouldn't actually take them seriously. Because it's the very foundations that you derive the fiqh from, the jurisprudence from. If you just know the jurisprudence, well, I might as well have an iPad. An iPad can give you all the fatwas, right? You know, if you do this, this invalidates your wudu or whatever, right? So when you have someone like himself, we should not take what they say in terms of the philosophy of science seriously, or when they make statements of a metaphysical nature, because they do not understand even the very basics. And I was surprised when I came across this. I was actually very surprised, because this is not a sort of mistake you'd expect him to make, right? But it's important to tear down the aura around these sorts of people. It's very important to tear that down. The reason is because these are the sort of people, because of the world we live in, they could say the moon is made of cheese and no one's going to argue with them because they have this aura, right? But we need to understand their limits. Yes?
Yeah, I've watched this clip, and even though he says that, they all clap and sort of like...
Yes.
Yeah. So why do you reckon he's held up like that? That's what.
And if you remember, what did he say as well? He said...
I can't remember what he said.
Yeah, but they all clapped. Because they're sheep. Because they're sheep. And if you remember, my very first slide was about social conformity. The only person who didn't cheer him on was Stephen.
Because
Right.
it says like planes fly or whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Sorry, you said something?
I watched another clip
Yep.
5-6 years ago, and it was with Mehdi Hassan
Yep.
about good and evil, and he asked him, how do you know that love exists?
Right.
Because you can't really test it, and he was like, you can just listen to the tone of voice of someone, and that's how you can know. And everyone started clapping, and I was shocked because I can fabricate that myself.
Yeah. But the difference is, sister, you don't have a degree from Oxford. If you had a degree from Oxford, you could say what you want. You could say what you want. You can say science leads to truth. In fact, I remember when the idea of junk DNA was revised, right? So there's this idea that, look, junk is not, it's not really junk, it's functional. And Richard Dawkins was sitting with the chief rabbi, Jonathan Sacks, and they were in conversation. And Jonathan Sacks raised this point that junk is no longer junk, so it fits more, it sort of goes against what Darwinists were saying for a long time. So this was something which Darwinists were saying, look, junk DNA is evidence, right? It's clear evidence that, our bodies is full of junk. And others were saying, well, that's not really the case. Once that was discovered, remember, he's a zoologist, he's not a geneticist, right? He said, in conversation with Jonathan Sacks, he said, well, that's what you would expect natural selection to do, to get rid of junk. And the funny thing is that, he said that, no one corrected him, no atheist corrected him, no atheist corrected him here. But even other famous atheists like P.Z. Myers would not agree with that, right? And, I don't like the double standards that a lot of online atheists have, and atheists have in general. So say a Muslim makes a mistake, right? This video debunked, right? The Quran says something which they understand in a particular way. Quran debunked. Yet, here is a very prestigious figure making a huge blunder, and there's deafening silence from them in terms of correcting him. However, if a Muslim was to make that sort of mistake, they would get slaughtered online, intellectually, right? So there's a lot of double standards. Oh, we're skeptical, we're free thinkers, we question everything. No, that's nonsense. You only question what you don't like. What you do like, you don't question at all. Oh, we gotta question religion, we gotta question this, we gotta question that. Darwinism, no, don't be unscientific, don't question that, yeah? So there's a lot of double standards. Okay. Underdetermination is, the actual term in the philosophy of science is underdetermination of scientific theory by observation. In a nutshell, all that's basically saying is the same pieces of data can give rise to alternative explanations. That's all it's saying. So this is a problem in the philosophy of science, apart from the problem of induction, which is that the same piece of data can give rise to alternative explanations. Very simple point. So when someone says science has given us truth, why is it giving us truth? Because this particular theory is based on evidence. Right, okay, this theory is based on evidence. How did you get there? Because this evidence, from this we infer this conclusion. Okay. Isn't it also possible that the same evidence you can infer a different theory? A way of thinking about this is a scatter graph. So imagine you have different dots on a scatter graph, and say it's a three-dimensional scatter graph. You can make a straight line, you can make a curve, you can make a sine wave. There's many different possibilities. The data doesn't just give rise to one theory. It can give rise to multiple theories. I was really happy to see that Charles Darwin himself points this out in the beginning of The Origin of Species. He actually says that the same data that's in my book, meaning The Origin, can be used to come up with an alternative to mine. But he does say, I do believe mine to be true. But he is honest enough to say that you can come to different conclusions using the same data. So Dawkins has a view, a scientism type of view, which even Charles Darwin would not have agreed with, right? And I find that kind of interesting. I mean, I'm always trying to plug my YouTube channel. It's called Darwinian Delusions, right? And one of the videos on there, and inshallah I'm going to do more, I just show the clear discrepancy between Richard Dawkins and Charles Darwin. You would think there's a united front, you know, Charles Darwin, he's being represented by Richard Dawkins because he speaks about him a lot. However, not only does he misrepresent him, sometimes he says the exact opposite to what Darwin said. And it's important to show that that the views are different. Holism in science, right? So, scientific theories are not tested on their own. They are tested as part of a web. So one scientific theory can impact another theory. The limitations of one scientific theory can affect another one. As an example, this is exactly what happened with Darwin's theory. Darwin's theory assumed millions of years, right? Billions, in fact. And according to the physics of the day, the Earth wasn't as old as Darwinism needed it to be. So Darwin's theory was limited by a theory in physics. And later on it was discovered that actually the universe is older, the Earth is older than that which they previously thought, and therefore Darwinism was given a sort of lift. So scientific theories are never tested on their own, and one of the limitations of science is that the variables that they have within their theory are dependent upon other theories which have unknown variables as well. So that limits how much progress science can make. And sometimes a scientific theory, assuming Darwinism is true, sometimes a scientific theory can seem to be false because of another theory when in fact that particular theory was false, which is what happened with Darwinism.
So he needed the universe to be that long for evolution to
Yes.
go that much.
Okay, another popular idea is that science doesn't prove things to be true, it only proves things to be false. How many people have heard that before? Falsification. So this is a very popular idea. Again, there's a difference between the popular understanding and academic understanding. Look, so they'll say, look, science, right? Science cannot prove things to be true, but it can prove things to be false. This is known as falsification. Falsification is an outdated view in the philosophy of science. Even theories which are supposedly falsified and dead in the water, they can be resurrected by changing the auxiliary assumptions, by changing the background assumptions, right? And I remember I had a recent discussion with Aaron Ra on this, and he tried to use this stuff about, oh, yeah, falsification. And I pointed out to him, you're completely out of date. Yeah? And you get this. It's very important to tear down the authority of these people. You have someone like himself who's got millions of views online. You know, he goes on conferences around the world. He's even given a talk at Cambridge University. And the very basics of philosophy of science, like basic stuff, he wouldn't know, right? So it's important for us to understand the difference between the public and the academic understanding. And if we look at the history of science, we will see that it is littered with false theories which were working well at one time. Recently, I gave the example of junk DNA. We can also look at the Newtonian example, where we moved from a Newtonian point of view to an Einsteinian point of view, even though Newtonian view of the universe worked well for at least 250 years. Better than Darwinism, better than any string theory or whatever, right? 250 years, yet the fundamental, if you were to make a prediction using Newtonian mechanics, right? Where is this planet going to be in 10 months' time? And you're to make a mathematical calculation, you would make a prediction it's going to be there. Then you'd go out after 10 months, 9 months, and go find it to be there. It worked to the T for over 250 years. Yet it turned out to be false. The assumptions about the time and space being fixed turned out to be false. Even the definition of mass turned out to be false, right? So it doesn't matter if it works. Something working doesn't mean it's true. All it means is it works. False models or true models, they can both work. And a side point to that is sometimes you have a grand theory and you have a lot of static ideas in the theory. And you have a grand theory with a lot of static ideas which are never really tested. So for example, if we were to take contemporary Darwinism, it would have a certain idea about, say, Hox genes in the Cambrian, right? Some abstract thing in the past. Today, it would say Darwinism is true because it's working, because bacteria that, if you apply antibiotic, you have medicines which are applied to bacteria and they die and whatnot, and some of them, they evolve resistance. Yes, that's something that's very testable. However, in the grand scheme of things, there's a lot of things in that theory which are completely idle, which are just historical, which don't play any role in terms of practical realities, and they're just in the past. So it's very important even when we talk about a theory that's working, like Darwinism's working, it doesn't mean all aspects of Darwinism are being tested, right? It's just those little things today that we're working on. But even those can fit within other models, right? So antibiotic resistance, it can fit in Lamarckian evolution, it can fit in intelligent design. Intelligent design, whether it's science or not, I'm not going to get into that. But the point is, it can fit into other paradigms. Okay, competitions. So we have scientific theories which are both working well, although they contradict each other. Today in physics, if you go to any physics lab or any university, speak to a physicist, Professor, do you believe in relativity? Of course. Do you believe in quantum mechanics? Of course. Do you realize that they contradict each other at a fundamental level? He'll say, of course. They both work. They both make novel predictions which are confirmed, yet they both contradict each other. They both can't be true, in a literal sense. So if someone says science leads to truth, show them this paradox. Here you have two very well confirmed scientific theories which are making novel predictions, precise predictions, which have great explanatory power and scope, yet they contradict each other. They both can't be true. And you get any basic book on the philosophy of science, you're going to get discussions about many scientific theories that we know are false today. They were empirically quite successful. Okay, any questions before I move on to realism and instrumentalism? No?
Didn't really understand the last one.
Okay. Forgot what the last slide was. Yeah. Okay, this is just what that was about is this, yeah? There's scientific theory A, scientific theory B. Both of these theories are accepted by physicists. They say this theory is a good working theory. However, the assumptions within those theories, they both can't be true. As an example, I don't know the assumptions within, I don't know the deep science of quantum mechanics and general relativity. But I'll give you an example to do with Newtonian and Einsteinian worldview. Einsteinian worldview says time and space is relative. It's like fabric. It's changing. Newtonian worldview says time and space is fixed. Both of the assumptions contradict each other. So you can't say Newtonian and general relativity are both true. You can't, because they contradict each other. Likewise, quantum mechanics and general relativity both work, but they both can't be true.
So what are you supposed to say then? What's the point of it?
Okay, the point of it is that science doesn't lead to truth, it only leads to working theories. A working theory doesn't mean it's true. That's the point. Make sense? So, going back to Peter Rabbit, even words like proof, right, which are used so regularly, there's no scientific proof for that. There's no scientific proof for this. Prove that to me scientifically. Philosophers would say something like this. Science is revisable, hence to talk about scientific proof is dangerous, because the term fosters the idea of conclusions that are graven in stone. Laymen regularly use the word proof. However, philosophers of science would not use those terms, because they understand a proof is something that you would get in mathematics. A proof is something you would get in terms of an observation, right? It is not something that science gives you. And other philosophers speaking about the history of science being littered with really good theories which turned out to be false. Okay. There are two types of naturalism. Firstly, what's naturalism? Anyone know? You know. What's naturalism? So, what's philosophical naturalism? Yes? I'm trying to make the audience more live here. Yeah, we're coming near to the last 2-3 slides. Who wants to help me out?
Well, there's a few words, or two main ideas. One is anything non-observable,
Yep.
non-physical,
Yep.
doesn't exist.
Yep.
The other one simply says anything that's non-existent, non-observational, may or may not exist, like it's
Excellent.
agnostic, neutral.
Excellent.
One is too extreme, the others are.
So, philosophical naturalism is basically saying anything non-natural we will not accept exists. Morality does not exist. Souls do not exist. God does not exist. The immaterial mind does not exist. Philosophical naturalism is atheistic. It is the idea that anything non-natural does not exist. Does everyone get that?
So only physical things.
Yes, exactly. Only physical objects or processes. Everything is broken down to physical objects or physical processes. Okay. Methodological naturalism is an assumption in science today, which is that when we are studying the world, we're going to assume that there is nothing non-natural. So it's an assumption. Guys get it? One is an assumption in science, one is a belief, a metaphysical claim. Assumption in science, a working model, and a belief, a metaphysical belief. These two things are distinct. However, they're conflated. So philosophical naturalism says nothing non-natural exists. So for example, Michael Roos, he's a philosopher of science and he's an atheist, but he would say, look, we acknowledge philosophical naturalism is a faith. It's not science, it's not proven, it's a faith. We believe this. Methodological naturalism is an assumption. Okay? Just keep those two things in mind. So all it's saying is, look, as a working assumption in science, we will not refer to God's creative agency and power, the immaterial mind, or morality existing as a real thing, or souls, or whatnot. Everything non-natural is gone. philosophical naturalism and methodological naturalism, one doesn't entail the other. Sorry, one does entail the other, but it's a one-way thing. Methodological naturalism does not entail philosophical naturalism. So if you're a scientist and you happen to be a methodological naturalist, which all scientists pretty much are, it doesn't mean you're a philosophical naturalist. So God is not mentioned in science, but that doesn't mean God doesn't exist. However, philosophical naturalism entails methodological naturalism. Popular new atheist propagandists, which is what they are, they blur these two distinctions. And even other prominent atheists, they openly say this is wrong. They openly even call out the likes of Richard Dawkins and say he shouldn't, even though they're atheists themselves, they say he shouldn't conflate the two. He shouldn't say one leads to the other. However, we need to be aware of these distinctions. So being a methodological naturalist doesn't mean you're an atheist. A good way of explaining this is you believe in morality as a scientist, but when you are working within the scientific discourse, you will not speak about morality because science cannot detect morality.
You can't apply.
Sorry? You can't apply it, exactly. So outside of science, you can speak about morals. Within science, you can't detect them. So what we've done today is we have covered these points. Science doesn't lead to atheism. Scientism as a philosophy is false. Science cannot observe God. So whenever scientism is pushed, it's a primer for atheism. I think this is an important point worth emphasizing. Scientism is everywhere. And scientism is a primer for atheism. It primes you for atheism because it gives you the wrong lens to look at the world. It's false because there are other sources of knowledge. It's not the only route of knowledge. And we have to make a distinction between the public understanding of science and the academic understanding. The academic understanding is it's not the only route of knowledge and it doesn't lead to certainty, but the popular understanding is it is the main route of knowledge and it does give you certainty. Also, another point worth highlighting is that not only do we know scientific conclusions cannot be certain because of the problem of induction, underdetermination, problem of unconceived alternatives, it's also because science only deals with an attempt to look at how the world works, not why the world exists, not those philosophical type questions. Another slide which I skipped out, which I was supposed to mention, but it fits in well here. You have two views in the philosophy of science. You have the view of realism and instrumentalism. Realism is the view that when scientists are speaking about a theory, when they're referring to unobservables, when they're referring to unobservable structures, processes, entities, those things are real. That's realism. Instrumentalism, or empirical constructivism, or anti-realism, whatever you want to call it, the other camp, they say when scientists are speaking about unobservable entities, structures, and processes, we are going to be agnostic about them. We don't know whether they exist or they don't exist. All we need to understand is whether you're a realist or you are an instrumentalist. And you do have these two camps in philosophy of science. Both camps agree with the problem of induction. Both camps agree with the underdetermination problem, the problem of unconceived alternatives, theory-ladenness, all of that. They both agree science doesn't give you absolute truth. And they both both camps, you would have people that would agree that science does not give you certainty and does not take the lion's share of what we consider to be our true rational beliefs. Everything good I have said is from Allah, every mistake is my own. Jazakallah khair for listening. And what we could do now is just take a few minutes for a break, and then we'll continue until Maghrib with the Q&A, inshallah. I forgot that there's no canteen, so you guys are going to stay here anyway. We could just start the Q&A now. So any questions? Yes?
Why is that last bit so important? Because I understand this methodological naturalism is as in like, we sort of limit ourselves as Muslims. We say, okay, we don't take the God out of the room. We say, okay, if I'm trying to find a cure for something, I say, okay, these persons need the cure. Allah is enabled us to do that.
Yeah.
But why is that important, the conflation? I don't understand why.
Okay, it's important because, let me give you the implication. Science doesn't talk about God, therefore there's no God. That's their argument. However, science doesn't talk about God because it's the assumption of science that we will not refer to God. It's not a conclusion that science has come to that there's no God. It's an assumption that while we're studying the world, we will not refer to God's creative power agency. Methodological naturalism wasn't always part of science, right? It's a later thing. But the doubt that is created in the minds of believers is, if scientists are not referring to God in the textbooks, therefore God doesn't exist. And the people who push this view, they are mislabeling an assumption as a conclusion. Methodological naturalism is an assumption, but they are trying to claim it's a conclusion that philosophical naturalism is true.
Okay.
That's why you shouldn't cross the wires.
Okay, well, the first one is a belief. It's not stop. Okay.
Yes, the first one is an assumption, and the second one is actually a belief. Philosophical naturalism is a belief. Methodological naturalism is an assumption.
It's almost voluntary.
Yes. Yeah. I walk in as a scientist into this room. This is a science lab. I'm working on bacteria. I'm working on this. I'm working on that. I'm not going to refer to God's creative power agency. That's methodological naturalism. That wouldn't have been the case 300 years ago. But that's the case now. Right? I'll give you an example of how this doesn't, like, I know someone who was a militant atheist. They used to believe in Darwinism, debate against religious people, hardcore, standard militant Richard Dawkins type atheist. They were studying evolutionary biology at university, and when studying the cell, they basically came to the conclusion that this cell cannot be the product of random mutations and natural selection. They cannot be. But when they tried to raise that, they were shut down. Because that possibility is not allowed. The way Richard Lewontin explains it, he's a Harvard professor, a biology professor, is that no matter how confusing, no matter how bizarre it seems, materialism within science is absolute. It's a priori and it's absolute. A priori meaning not because of evidence, it's before evidence. Because we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Those are his words. We cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Yeah? And I respect him because he's honest. He's honest. He's saying, look, it doesn't matter. Another way that was explained was Francis Crick. Anyone know Francis Crick?
Yeah, the DNA model.
DNA, won the Nobel Prize, militant atheist, right? He said biologists have to keep reminding themselves what they see evolved, it wasn't designed. So he's not giving them a scientific principle, he's giving them a philosophical principle, meaning, guys, keep in mind, it doesn't matter whether it looks like a cell is a tiny city like New York, yeah, which it is. Remember, a priori, meaning before evidence, it evolved. It wasn't designed.
How do you prove it?
You can't. It's an a priori principle.
How do you know that this is a priori?
Because they say it is. They make the assumption it is.
So it's philosophical then?
Yes, of course, yeah.
So it's not science?
Yeah, it's not. They agree it's not science. Method. You see, I walk into this room, right, and say I'm the owner here, right,
Okay.
and I say, right, I don't like people who wear flowers, like Brother Hamza here, right? I don't like people who wear flowers, right? That's just my rule. Anybody who walks into this room has to conform to that rule,
Yeah.
right? If you're wearing anything with flowers, get out, yeah? Within the scientific discourse, methodological naturalism is the rule. So when you walk into the scientific lab, you cannot mention God or the soul or morals or the existence of morals or the immaterial mind or anything like that. Anything non-naturalistic. By a assumption, not a conclusion. Yeah?
And still is true in the lab.
Yes.
We know that when we apply for PhD, for example, we don't want to upset our professor, lest our funding goes cut. And
Yeah.
These sort of things exist.
Of course. I mean, I even know of one biologist who believes in God, who had a particular cell theory, and he contacted Nature, I believe, or one of these major papers. I mean, to be honest, okay, scrap that story because we can't verify it, but the principle applies. If you hand in a scientific paper to a prestigious journal in which you mention God, it's not going to be like, okay, let's see if he has anything. No, God is deleted at the entry point.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just deleted at the entry point.
But that's not science itself.
Yeah, of course it's not.
That's it.
That's not it. That's why they're honest. Like Richard Lewontin, he's honest. He says methodological naturalism is a priori. A priori means before evidence.
So you don't want to, yeah.
For example, the idea of causality is a priori, is before evidence. We believe in effect and cause. Yeah? So he says this is a priori.
And then if we say that our Islam is a priori, whatever Quran says, for example, if we say that, they say, okay, prove me. Or if I say counter, okay, you prove me. Why your argument is a priori, not my one. And then you can prove. So it can go on and on for like centuries.
Yeah. Any other questions?
So what do you think about someone like Sheldrake? Like what would be our approach to someone like him about what he says?
I can't say everything that he... Sorry? Repeat the question. Okay. So you're asking what would our approach be to someone like Rupert Sheldrake, right? So I can't comment on his scientific views. I can't. However, as a Cambridge-trained, respectable biologist, right? For him to have his public talk on TED banned because it didn't fit with the atheist worldview, which is what happened. His talk got banned. Our approach would be, where's the freedom of speech that you glorify so much? Yeah? In science. You say every idea should be challenged, everything should be questioned. We say fair enough. You say there should be freedom of speech in science. We say fair enough. Good, we agree with you. So when a biologist who is using science, not religion, and scientific data to challenge the predominant view which atheists try and project, on the minimum, whether he's right or wrong, let him speak out. Why ban him? Why ridicule him? Why attack him? Which is what they did with him. If you guys don't know, he's a scientist who wrote a book called The Science Delusion, who was challenging materialism within science, and he got completely ambushed intellectually.
Sacked as well.
Yeah, of course he's a scientist, yeah.
No, he got sacked from the Cambridge.
No, he didn't get sacked.
Okay.
His talk got banned and he was ridiculed. And his talk was not based on philosophy or religion.
What basis they banned it? Like, did they reason?
Because they don't like it. They don't like it. They want to maintain an order, right? They want to maintain, someone's going to point out the king has no clothes. and they want to, you know, stop that finger that's pointing towards that reality.
What's the name again?
Rupert Sheldrake.
So is this talk available on YouTube?
Yeah, because someone re-uploaded it. It was re-uploaded. It got more famous once they banned it, which is what usually happens. Were you raising your hand, Saqib? Or were you just playing with your hands? Just going like this? Is that hurry up? Is that hurry up sign? Okay. So Maghrib is in how long? Okay, we still have a bit of time for Q&A. What I did want to do, I'm surprised no one raised questions on, well, there's a lot of content, so, you know, be happy to even challenge the content. You know, I don't mind. They say, look, I don't agree with that, or you're misrepresenting this point, or how do you know this, or, you know, who else says this?
What if someone says, I believe in science and morality? Where's the contradiction there?
No contradiction. It's fine.
Then what was the point?
If someone says, I believe in science,
Yeah.
it's fine. No problem. However, that statement is a philosophical statement. That's all we're pointing out. We're pointing out the statement itself is not scientific. And their claim, when they say, I believe in science, is scientism. So they're fine. You're fine. We're not going to challenge somebody if they said we believe in science and morality or whatever. But that's not a scientific statement. That's what we're pointing out. Make sense? Because it's very, you know, it's very important. When I think about dawah, right? One of the first things you think about is Christianity. Or you think about Ahmadiyya, or you think about Trinity, or how to dismantle it. And that's just because the majority of the people in the world are Christian. But over the last 20 years, dawah has evolved because instead of tackling the Trinity using the Nicene Creed, we have to tackle scientism using the philosophy of science. Essentially, we're still tackling a religion, right? And it's not just a religion from our perspective. Even philosophers, atheist philosophers have pointed out that Darwinism is a religion, that scientism is a religion, and the incoherency of these worldviews. So you don't have to be a religious person to realize this particular problem, because other secular academics have realized it.
Everything is like an ism, some sort of ism anyway.
Not everything is an ism. I mean, if you believe in maths, you believe in maths, right? But if you believe maths is the only root of knowledge, you believe in mathism, yeah? You've gone beyond. Yes?
What's your definition of science?
What's my definition of science, or what's their definition?
Well, in this talk, what is
In this talk, it's using testing theories using observations, or using reasoning upon observations to come up with theories.
Theories.
The thing about the definition of science is there is no one definition philosophically. You know, if you watch who watches a Big Bang show? No one should really watch it, but you know, I watch it from the perspective of propaganda. Yeah, there's a lot of propaganda in that American sitcom. And one of the things, if you just watch it, even the intro is, it's excessive worship, it's excessive trust in science, and the sort of dichotomy it makes between stupid religious believers and intelligent atheists. Yeah? So, even if you watch a popular program like that, which is a way of social engineering, right? You find that the very definition of science that's used throughout the program, it falls apart when you study the first page of a philosophy book on science. It falls apart. Because our world is riddled with this type of propaganda.
Have you thought about, because you are working on working on basically the science and atheism and how they're trying to control the, like TED is the very, very prominent lecture. Yeah, there's a model of the presentation. That's how you learn how to present from TED. Such institute is definitely controlled by the atheists, we can say now. Yeah?
Well, I wouldn't say it's controlled by atheists. I would say they're susceptible to pressure.
Okay. and then you see the other. So do you think then how this ism, atheism or scientism, do you think any political motivation behind this?
Yeah,
ism?
of course.
Yeah,
No doubt.
Is it because the European, they have been tortured in the name of religious 200-300 years ago, so they want to come out of this in the name of secularism. Now they are turning secularism to atheism.
Some academics have said that.
Yeah.
Some academics have said that. So what you're saying is that the European experience with religion was so negative
So bad. Yeah.
that they then wanted nothing to do with religion and used science as a baton against religion. And then because their culture became the predominant culture in the world, the rest of the world, they tried to teach, you shouldn't give religion a go because we had a bad experience. So you don't even need to bother having that experience because we can tell you it doesn't work. Some academics have said that, exactly that thing, yeah.
Because as a Muslim, we are sleeping in those periods and we are fighting each other. Like,
What do you mean?
Like because in Ottoman Empire,
Yeah.
Indian Empire, we lost to British in 1753. The Ottoman Empire were weak. So our knowledge, for example, our knowledge from that perspective, we couldn't develop because we were very good at science, like Ibn Haytham, all other scientists. So we couldn't carry out the work.
Yes.
So they did explain science in their world
Yes.
view rather
Look,
than us.
I agree with you that they went ahead of us because we went behind.
Behind, yeah.
However, the purpose of Allah sending Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not to do science.
Not to science, yes.
Yeah, this may not fit well with the predominant view in the world that we need to be progressive, we need to believe in science. No, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sent as a mercy to the worlds to reconnect mankind to Allah.
To Allah.
And when mankind is reconnected to Allah, a byproduct is economic prosperity. A byproduct is education. A byproduct is science. A byproduct is welfare. That's all byproducts. But fundamentally, it is Tawheed which is the purpose. And the reason why I'm highlighting this is because sometimes atheists say, why are you guys so behind on science? Before I answer the question, and before the way I would have answered is, well, we're behind because of colonialism, we're behind because of this, we're behind because of that. Then I started to realize those are really stupid answers. Because that question, for me, doesn't make any sense anyway. The more important thing for me, which is a crisis in the Muslim world, is not education, is not stability, is not the fact that we're behind on science, is the fact that majority of Muslims don't pray. Yeah? Tablighi Jamaat. So that's the focus. If Muslims are not connected to Islam, what's the point of we being great in science or great politically or great economically? The very structure of the Muslim in terms of their life should be based upon the connection with Allah, which is the salah, right? And the salah, the usul, the objective behind that, the foundation behind that is connection with Allah. So it's not just a bunch of movements. So you should be remembering Allah throughout your life. Salah is just one mechanism to remind you of that. If we don't get that right in the Muslim world, who cares if we're very good at science or not? I'd rather have a Muslim world which is connected to Allah than a Muslim world which is not connected to Allah but great at science.
They will do more damage.
Sorry?
They will do more damage.
Yes, that's true. That's true because science, you're right, you can do damage if you don't have like for example, certain types of weapons, right? Scholars have written about certain types of weapons and them not being permissible because they're just completely indiscriminate, right? But we don't even think of that. We think anything science does is good. If a large amount of scientific endeavors are there to create destructive weapons, from an Islamic perspective, that's not good. Imam Ghazali, he writes about this. He says that it's a communal obligation, fard al-kafaya, to do medicine. Right? And that's a heavy statement. That's a heavy statement. But so when we do science, we do it with a moral imperative. We do it with a good intention. You could end up doing science with bad intentions. A lot of scientific advancements in the early 20th century were actually done by Nazis. A lot. In fact, if you look at Operation Paperclip, they took Nazi scientists to America and other Nazi scientists were taken to the Soviet Union because they were so fantastic. Right? So science is not that everything science does is good. No, everything the Prophet says is good. Yeah? Not everything that science does is good. Our aim is to reconnect people to Allah, and why we're doing this is not because we want to be better at science. That's just a byproduct. We're doing this to reconnect people to Allah.
And their aim is to spread shaitan. So going back to the brother's question,
Yeah.
the whole point of it is because shaitanic stuff and atheism is being spread
With that intention.
with
Yeah.
that intention.
So the last question is, how are doing now? You know, what the Muslims condition now? How we are doing? Are we at a very slow rate? The dawah is happening around the world at a concerted effort. But because you guys have lots of experience doing dawah, do you see, are we preparing ourselves in what rate, or do you see, like what we should be doing?
I don't know. But what I do know is I'm going to be accountable to Allah of what's within my control. You know, when somebody asked the Prophet ﷺ, when is the day of judgment? He said, what have you prepared for it? When you think of a grand thing, what's happening in the Muslim world, what's happening in the Western world, how things are going to fit, Islamophobia, you've got all these things, right? It's just wheel spinning. You'll get nowhere. What you need to do is think to yourself, Allah is closer to me than my jugular vein. What does Allah want me to do in this life? Right? And you just do those actions that Allah wants you to do in this life.
By observing those real, like a problem or what
No,
can do.
I would say don't observe those problems. You'll get depressed and you'll probably die. Yeah? If you were to actually look at the problems, right, you would think, let's just give up.
No, just looking at the problem to make the strategy decision, not to.
Yes, fine, I get that. But what I'm saying is, look, I don't think we should look at how our actions can change the world. What we should look at is, what does Allah want me to do, because He knows which actions are needed from me right now.
That's the right mental.
Yeah? So let me just get the question of the brother behind, because you raised your hand.
So you notice a few points that you mentioned here. So one of the points was that you talked about science and we should be focusing on getting people to connect to Salah. I'm sure you meant it in a more broader context, because if we look at the time of the Prophet he did send Sahaba to Yemen to learn about weapons, and other Sahaba to different places, and even the continuation, if we look at history, Islam encourages for us to do research and development.
Yes.
So we could see that the Muslims, they were connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they were also in the advancement in the field of science, astronomy, and so on and so many other things that history spoke of that. So obviously we're looking at a balanced view, because it comes to that other, when neglect dunya and focus only on deen, when actually the deen came from dunya, and it's got to be a balance, isn't it? So I'm sure you meant it in that context,
maybe I can be misunderstood. So look, for me, it's not about balance. For me, it's that if you get your tawheed right in the Muslim world, everything else will follow. Everything else will follow, literally. Why? Because Allah's Messenger said the best of people are those who benefit people. So what? The Muslim should be the one who discovers the next penicillin, automatically. It's a automatic entailment of connection with Allah, that you will have science, you will have economics, you have peace, you will have charities. It's a necessary entailment that when you get your relationship right with the Creator, then what Allah wants on earth, it will be done. However, what I have seen amongst Muslims is when they first point out the problem that needs to be solved in the Muslim world, they say, we need education. The fact is, I know people who are educated who are Muslim, who are very secular, who even mock Islam. Yeah? You have to get the first foundation right, and that leads to everything. Because why is it that no Muslim is thinking to themselves, do you know what? We're about to go into a new dark ages. We've completely overused antibiotics. The Prophet ﷺ told us something that no atheist can justify. No atheist has any reason to believe this, but we have a reason to believe it. The Prophet ﷺ says every disease has a cure, so seek for the cure. So we believe everything can be cured. Metaphysically, that is our belief, that's our paradigm. Yet an atheist cannot have that belief. They can have it as a belief, but they cannot base that on something. We know every disease has a cure, and the Prophet ﷺ taught us that you should seek the cure. So a worshipper of Allah can be a worshipper who's looking through a microscope trying to find the next cure. Right? So what I've found amongst Muslims, and especially Muslim parents, I'm a parent myself, I realized there is an over glorification and deification of education for no other purpose except education. Yeah? But that's not Islam. There has to be an objective. Some of the most intelligent people on earth may be kuffar, may be atheists. So it's not education in it as an end in of itself. For us, it's a means to an end. It's like, for example, one of the Imams, Imam Malik maybe, I believe, I think it was Imam Malik. Someone asked him, Father, his son asked him, Father, you teach us to learn knowledge, to do this, to do this, to do this. Yet there is this man who has no knowledge, but he has taqwa. Right? Because there was a very pious man that Imam Malik's son was pointing towards. Imam Malik said, we gain knowledge to be like him. Meaning the purpose of knowledge is not donkeys with books on their back. The purpose of knowledge is to have taqwa. Yeah? So as Muslims, we sometimes mistake the means as the end. This dunya is a means, it's not the end. Yeah? So even when I'm doing this particular talk, I remember there was a Muslim mum who got quite upset when I was giving a talk, right? Because I was giving a talk, and a lot of parents come to IERA and other organizations say, my child's having doubts, this, right? I gave a talk and I said, look, frankly, I don't care. Frankly, I do not care. I'm not here to get rid of someone's doubts. I'm here to teach you to advance Islam. A byproduct of that is you'll get rid of your doubts if you have doubts about this. That's a byproduct, yeah? Because just yesterday I was giving a talk in a mosque, and there's a bunch of teenagers, right? And there was problems about this and that, and then outside the mosque there's also this thing about where you give in your knife crime, things to do with drinking, things to do with this, things to do with relationships, things to do... And I was thinking to myself, where's the youth of Islam? When you think of youth, what do you think of? This problem, drinking problem, stabbing problem, this doubt, that problem, yeah? Yet it was the youth of Islam which took on Abu Jahl. It was the youth of Islam, like Sultan Mehmed Fateh, who conquered Constantinople. It was the youth of Islam who stood with the Prophet ﷺ. It was the youth of Islam who we remember every Friday. Who is that? The people of the cave. I was thinking, what the hell's wrong with our youth? They're supposed to be the foundation, right? And at the moment, they're just coming to us with problems. And the thing is, the reason why we as Muslims have the problems that we do is because we've forgotten the mission of the Prophet ﷺ. At the end of the day, yeah, raise your hand if you want an intercession of the Prophet ﷺ on the Day of Judgment. Okay, ask yourself a question, and we can end upon this. How can you dare expect intercession of the Prophet ﷺ when your mission in life is not his mission? His mission was Islam's going to spread as far as the day and the night. You take an average Muslim, what's their mission? Let me get a house and mortgage. I don't care whether it's halal or haram. Let me put my child through university. Let me make sure that I have a good status and a good car. That's their mission. When the mission of the Prophet ﷺ was the advancement of Islam to connect the lost Bani Adam to their creator. So if you want the intercession of the Prophet ﷺ, make sure your mission in life is his mission. Everything good I've said is from Allah, every mistake is my own. There's a mosque upstairs, and there's also a sisters area in the back where the curtains are. So there's wudu facilities as well. So we're just going to go out for Maghrib now. Jazakallah khair. It's open, isn't it? If it's not open, I'm going to get security guard to open it from downstairs. Already? It's not Maghrib time yet. It started already? Good to see you, man.
Fantastic. That's the last bit is more. they're connecting to Allah.
The-
Ibn Hisham started science research from the Quran ayah.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
And Hamza
No, absolutely.
He started discovery inspiring from the Quran as a worship.